Hey, Tommy. Hey, since you're the first person on here, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good.
I was a little worried about my microphone because my laptop crapped out, and so I'm using my boyfriend's
Oh
fancy
no.
something.
Yeah.
And I've never used it before, and I'm like, oh no, this is not good. So, okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm going to take a quick break then, and I'll
All right. Same here. Bye.
Hi, Holly. I don't think I'm going to do any breakout rooms because we're just not going to have the time.
Okay.
But speaking of time, keep track of time for me if I seem like I'm going over. I will try myself, but
Okay. I'll keep
um,
track and I'll just be the one to, when we finish to stop recording and then pick it up when we go. So you don't have to worry about that.
okay, good deal.
Okay.
All right. I'm worried about going over on time because this is a broad topic for
Do you
a
want to
short
stop
time.
do you want to stop like at 25 after, or do you want to do like 28 just to get,
We can go up to 28 or as close as we can till the
Okay.
next session. I
Okay.
think would be fine. My volume's good. Tommy said he could hear me fine.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. I have never used this. My laptop, my home laptop crapped out, and I'm using my boyfriend's fancy something.
Oh,
So it's smarter than I am.
I doubt that, but no, it's a good volume.
I'm tech challenged.
Oh, please. Yeah.
It's a big group.
Yeah. Like hearing all those dings.
Hi, Peggy, and your white hair. I do like it.
Jeannie, that's a great picture.
Who has a great picture?
Jeannie does.
Mhm.
I know, I love it so much.
I changed mine to my dog and I can't figure out how to change it back. So
That is Gwen, the biker with a heart. She was developed during the pandemic.
nice. Okay, do we want to go ahead and get started?
I need to, don't we?
Yeah, we probably do. So I had a hard time really condensing the things I wanted to say in this short of a presentation. 16-week class doesn't even begin to scrape the surface of mental health. So 30 minutes is going to be about as basic as it gets. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. I don't know.
Sorry about that. Just a minute. I'll mute
That's
myself.
okay. I don't know if we will have time for a Q&A. The next presentation kind of builds on this one. So it's different, but there are some similarities. And then if you're with me all day, the third presentation is going to be putting yourself in your student's shoes. And the goal behind that is really to increase empathy and to kind of really think about what our students go through on a daily basis. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you guys see this? Understanding and responding to student mental health needs. Thank you for the thumbs up. Okay. So again, I mean, 30 minutes is not a lot of time to cover this topic. If you have questions, feel free to email me at any time or call me. I want some group discussion, some participation if we can. And if you want to unmute yourself and just, call something out or ask a question or put something in the chat, that's fine too. I'm not sure that I'll be able to see the chat. So Holly, can you see the chat? Okay, because with my screen up and then with the way I've got things set up, I don't see it right now. So first question, when I say mental health, what comes to mind? Give me a couple answers. Somebody.
There's just so, I mean, I'm kind of like you. I don't know where to start.
Yeah. Okay.
Anxiety.
Give me just one or two things.
Anxiety.
The ability to get through the day with just, facing the normal pressures and being able to handle just the normal pressures.
Okay. Being able to get through the day. And I know, some of us struggle with that from time to time. I really want to focus on students, but at the same time, I don't want to forget that all of us have mental health as well, right? And maybe some of us have mental health issues, or we have difficulty in getting through the day from time to time, or depending on maybe what our health status is or our family status is, that may affect our mental health. So whatever I'm talking about, I want you to apply that to whoever it is you interact with regularly, whether that be students or family members or friends or what have you. I heard somebody say anxiety, and I'm not sure if I heard anything else.
How about self-worth?
Self-worth, absolutely, definitely. So those are all good answers. Anxiety, self-worth, getting through your day, heavy stuff, right? But it affects all of us. How do you know if a student is having mental health issues? And that's a question for everybody.
I think
Or a friend.
I think sometimes it's obvious. I mean, when you notice someone who just is not him or herself, not themselves. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes they're masking like we all do. And it's more difficult then.
Absolutely. So sometimes we know, right? Sometimes you can just see this person isn't their normal selves. Sometimes they'll say things that indicate that there's an issue. And then sometimes you have absolutely no idea. So the answer is really kind of one of those, well, you just don't always know. We all know that students are struggling, but we really don't understand the extent of it. Now, I don't want to say every student's struggling, and every student's struggle is obviously different. You have students with anxiety, you have students with depression. I'll probably hit on those two topics the most because they're very common, and I think a lot of us can relate to those particular issues. But there may be some more serious issues that your students are dealing with as well, how they're coping with what's going on with them. There might be some substance abuse issues, there might be some personality disorders at play. And so if you're interested in that, I'm sure Jeannie can tell you more about personality disorders, but know that mental health goes far beyond anxiety and depression. But it really truly does affect our, how we get through our day every day. Oh, and now I can see things in the chat. Okay, awesome.
Okay.
So,
I was trying, I didn't want to interrupt
down,
you. So.
Changes in normal behavior, absolutely. Being aware of mental needs, not just physical depression and anxiety. So those are all good answers. Okay. How do I get to the next slide? I told you I was tech challenged. My screen is completely frozen.
I think, Sarah, if you take it, I've done this a million times to myself. If you take it off of your full screen.
Okay.
And sorry, I don't have a camera, or you would see my face, not just my voice, but.
Okay. Do I hit escape?
Try that, because I think whenever you make it real big, you don't have the option at the bottom to flip through your slides.
Okay, I hit escape and it's doing nothing. There we go. All right, we may just have to do this just to be on the safe side. So mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So it's how we're feeling, it's what we're thinking, it's that self-worth stuff that was mentioned. And then it's, how we relate to others, how we interact with people, and ultimately how we get through our day. It affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. And I think sometimes we're aware of that and sometimes we're not. Sometimes we are so aware that we do a really good job of hiding how we feel and hiding what we're thinking, because we don't want people to think that we're crazy. We don't want people to think that we're experiencing depression because maybe we're afraid of the way they're going to respond to that. We know that the stigma is decreasing. I think our culture is becoming more open about mental health and about normalizing mental health issues, but we still have a long way to go. Mental health is important at every stage of life, and we are working, what was the statistic, 58%, so almost 60% of our students are 17 to 20 years old. If you think about child development, what's going on, or just human development, what's going on between 17 and 20?
A lot.
A lot.
Sense of identity.
That's the whole identity crisis stage. It's what am I going to major in? It's relationship stuff. It's moving out on your own. So in addition to kind of trying to figure out your whole darn life and getting a lot of pressure from other people, you also might be experiencing just that daily struggle of paying your bills, or, trying to figure out why a friend is mad at you, or, trying to just manage the stress of finals and those kinds of things. So a lot is an understatement, but that's really probably, I guess, the best answer. What kinds of things influence our mental health? And so you can put that in the chat or you can call it out. It's a question for everybody. You might think about your specific mental health status, but you can just kind of think in general.
Life challenges.
What's going on in your life?
Yeah, what's going on in your life?
Support network.
Good.
Sleep.
Absolutely. The day, your surroundings, I'm looking at the chat, your workload, your social life, addiction issues. So a little bit of everything, and we can't control all of that. We can't control what the people who we work with do. Sometimes we can't control what our family members do. We can't predict if we're going to get into, a car wreck. Nobody wants that to be their day. But sometimes those kinds of things happen. And even if it's not a serious one, you still oftentimes have to reconfigure your entire day and the stress and the pressures you're already dealing with. Kelsey, finances, absolutely. Surroundings, work, undealt with issues in personal life, finances, social life, sleep patterns. So
If you
tons of
have
things.
kids, that affects it. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yeah,
Yeah.
what they're going through and what they deal with.
Right. And I know a lot of us probably are on here because mental health is a hot topic and you want to learn more about it. And you want to be able to serve your students and relate to people who are going through mental health issues. But I also know that, you know, I forgot, I totally lost my train of thought there. Um, Oh, here's where I was going with that. Thanks, Holly. Some of us are just super empathetic. And I know, I'm guilty of that. And I say guilty because I think we have to be mindful when we are really empathetic, not to let that get the best of us, right? Not to take care of other people before we take care of ourselves. And I know a lot of you personally do those kinds of things, because I do those kinds of things and I've had discussions with people. And so maybe you're on here not just because you want to learn more about what your students are going through, but because you really kind of feel the things that other people are going through, right? Your kids, your grandkids, so on and so forth. So here's the list that I came up with. And you guys can see my screen okay, right? I'm moving things around, so it's hard to know exactly what you see. Oh, am I frozen again? Slide 5, come on. Our genetics, right? And that's one thing we really can't control, unfortunately. So, knowing enough about my genetics, I know that maybe I'm at a predisposition to experience mental health issues because I have a family history of mental health issues. Our experiences, our socialization, how you grew up, the things that you were told. Someone mentioned self-image earlier. Maybe you grew up in a household where you were told like you can do or be anything. Right. Everybody had a positive outlook. There were happy moments, traditions, things that you can remember that have really enriched your life and that you look back on with excitement. Or maybe you grew up in a household where nobody really did those kinds of things. Nobody was positive. People just weren't around. When they were around, it wasn't a good environment. Maybe you were told things like you're never going to amount to anything. And we know that those things do indeed affect a child's mental health. And then, obviously we're a product of all of our experiences. And so those things can affect our adult life as well. Our physical health, if you aren't feeling good, then your mental health can suffer. I think it's no secret that I've recently been through cancer. Absolutely, that has affected my mental health. I have migraines on a regular basis. That absolutely affects my mental health. If you have difficulty in any respect, or if you're on a medication perhaps for your physical health, that can affect your mental health as well. Substance abuse can affect our mental health, and sometimes that's how people cope with mental health issues, which we know isn't always the healthiest thing to do. Relationships, that can be your friendships, that can be the people you work with, that can be your spouse, your kids, whomever, what they're going through, maybe how they're treating you, maybe, something that has happened in that relationship and you're having a hard time connecting. Trauma can be anything from abuse and neglect, which we'll talk about in a second, to some kind of you fell out of a tree and broke your arm kind of thing, or maybe you were working on the roof and you fell and broke some bones. I mean, that's a traumatic experience, and we think of that as being more physical, but that can affect our mental health as well, because we're taking time off work, right? It changes our social life, our routine. Some people, I think, would say the pandemic has been very traumatic for them. And so trauma can mean different things for different people. What you find traumatic, I might not. And I think that's just something to keep in mind. Some people will share trauma experiences and they're very cool, calm, and collected about that. Whereas another person who's been through something similar, maybe the degree or the severity of what they experience, same kind of trauma, different degree or severity, is going to have a very different impact on them. Someone mentioned self-image earlier, and I think all of these things influence our self-image. The way we talk to ourselves is extremely important. I cannot stress enough the power of positive talk. So I encourage my students to talk to themselves positively. I sometimes encourage myself to talk to myself positively, right? You can self-talk to yourself about self-talk. That's kind of crazy. But you really can and should do that, because the power of positive self-talk, I think, is much more influential than we even realize. And then if you, and I saw a lot of CCR&R people on here, you're probably familiar with ACEs, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. There's a lot of data out there, a lot of research that indicates that these adverse childhood experiences can stick with us throughout life. And even if you've forgotten some of these things, your body and your brain can still keep track of them. So some of these traumatic or adverse childhood experiences can really and truly like rewire our brain, how we respond to things, how we see ourselves, how we deal with situations and with stress. And they can also affect our physical health. So there's a list of 10 things. If you ever go see a therapist, or especially if you take a child to see a therapist, they may do an inventory of ACEs, and that's just so they can kind of gauge the things that the child has been through, or maybe that you've been through, that are affecting you now later in life. So you guys can read those. Obviously, physical, sexual, and verbal abuse would make the list, physical and emotional neglect. But here are some things that I think for a long time we really underestimated when it comes to mental health. Having a family member with mental illness. If you grow up in a household and think about those socialization experiences, and your parent has mental illness, that's going to influence the way they parent. That's going to influence the messages that they send to you. And I'm not saying that all parents with mental illness are bad parents. Please don't think that. You can be a depressed parent and still be a good parent, but that is going to still impact your child. And sometimes it can have a really negative impact, especially if you aren't, getting help for the things that you're going through, or the illness that you have. And I like to say mental health issues instead of mental illness, but I think that it really depends on like the strength and the severity of the situation, because these things occur on a continuum. If you have a family member in prison, you may have one parent in prison, one parent with a mental illness. You may have a family member who is addicted to drugs and or alcohol. This could be a parent. This could be an older sibling who's in a caregiver position. This could even be a grandparent. This is somebody who you're exposed to on a regular basis. Witnessing domestic violence. And then the last one is losing a parent to separation, divorce, or death. We may not remember these things. We may not see them as traumatic. But again, our body and our brain keep score when it comes to these kinds of things. And you have students sitting in your classroom, you have students coming to register for classes. You're talking to people probably on an everyday basis who have been through some really horrendous things. And that's affecting their self-image, potentially their mental health status, and ultimately maybe the way they see themselves and the world and you and interact with you, right? So that's a lot to take in, right? Thoughts or comments about those ACEs or trauma, or all of the things that affect mental health? Okay, so here's the next question. How does all of this stuff affect how we get through our everyday life? How does it affect our social functioning? And if you want to put a chat or an answer in the chat, that'd be great. Or you can call it out too.
I find I have issues with like energy levels when I'm having, either a moment or a couple days or something. So just energy levels to get work done, to go to events that we plan, interacting with students, faculty, or staff. It really does have like a complete effect on my total mood and total work schedule.
Yeah, 100%. That's a good answer. I'm seeing in the chat here, attention span, that's huge. Maybe someone doesn't want to go somewhere. They make excuses. They don't have energy. I think a lot of us can relate to this. Things sound great when you're invited, but then you dread going to them. How many of you can relate to that? I know I can sometimes, because we want to be social, but then when it comes down to it, maybe we've had a bad day, or maybe we're, just feeling kind of sad. Maybe we are dealing with depression or anxiety or some other kind of issue. And so that affects our relationships. Maybe we don't get invited the next time. It can make daily tasks overwhelming or unbearable. That's in the chat. Absolutely. So, all of those things that we need to do every day paralyze you, inability to get out of bed, irritability. So let's think about mental health and social functioning on a spectrum, right? And it's not an either or. It's not like you have good or bad mental health. It's not like you can function or you can't. Maybe in extreme situations that's the case, but most of us fall somewhere on this spectrum, right? And I looked for a spectrum, I couldn't find one, so now I just have a line on the screen. But if you want to think of that as kind of, the your mental health is good on one side and not so good on the other, and you might be good at gauging where you're at on that spectrum, or maybe you don't. I think a big part of mental health, and especially if we look at how we treat ourselves and how, whether or not we seek help, a lot of that has to do with self-awareness. So maybe you know where you're at, maybe you don't, maybe it fluctuates from one day to the next, right? One day it's like everything's great, I'm going to get out of bed, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to do something social after work, I'm going to run some errands. And the next day it's like, this is all a struggle. I'm going to go to work, I'm going to come home, I'm going to do nothing, right? And maybe I'm going to be, irritable the whole time I'm there. Or maybe, there are going to be certain things that I'm going to avoid, or certain people or situations that I'm going to avoid because my social functioning has been impacted by my mental health status. Right. So all of that makes sense. And I think that's something we know, but I think it's really important to stop and reflect on that sometimes. Especially when we're working with students, because we interact with so many people on a daily basis. One, I think it's important not to take personal sometimes when people are avoiding us, or when, somebody chooses not to go to that social function. I think a lot of times, when people are hurting, or when they're sad or they're scared or they've had a bad day, it seems like they're taking that out on us, and maybe they are, but that's not really the intention, right? So I think it's important not to take things personally. And I think it's also really important to realize I'm going through all these things. So are maybe these 30 people who are in front of me, or maybe, these 3 people who were in line waiting to talk to me, or whatever the case might be. And that kind of leads me to the idea that it's so important that we normalize mental health. 50 years ago, I just made the chat big and nothing else. Let me see if I can get rid of that. 50 years ago, we would not have been having this discussion, would we? What about in service 20 years ago? 10? No, right? So we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And these are just some things that I try to remind myself on a regular basis. So I want to share them with you guys. We're all human with human problems, right? Every single one of us. Give people some grace. Now, I'm not asking you to be super easy on your students, right? Hold them accountable, but also realize we're all human with human problems. And sometimes it's important to maybe have a discussion about, what's going on, or to recognize the fact that maybe there are things that we can't see that are going on behind the surface. And maybe we should be, as patient as we can. We all have bad days. We have all experienced something traumatic. If you haven't, I want to talk to you. I want to move in with you. I want to be your best friend, because you're an anomaly, and also you're probably really positive to be around. But, I'm pretty sure that everybody on this Zoom and everybody that you interact with on a daily basis has experienced something traumatic, whether it's really severe or not. We've all been through some things. And a lot, because of my role at work, a lot of you have talked to me about these things. A lot of students have talked to me about these things. And it's just amazing to hear sometimes the things that people tell you that you would never have any idea about. We're all susceptible to changes in our health, both mental and physical. And we know the mental affects the physical affects the mental. Nobody expects to get sick. I love dogs. It's okay. I've locked mine out for the day, unfortunately, because they help my mental health, right? We all
Sometimes
have
they don't do so good.
but we're all susceptible to changes in our health, right? Things happen that we absolutely have no control over and can't plan for. We all have friends and family members with poor mental health, whether that be depression, anxiety, addiction, or something else. Some of us, unfortunately, I think have a lot of that in our family, and some of us maybe just have the one. I don't know. Hopefully you don't call them the black sheep of the family, but that might be, kind of who they are, because you've just got that one family member who's always depressed or whatever. We should be able to talk about our mental health and our experiences without shame, fear, or self-depreciation. That is huge. We need to create those kinds of spaces for our students, for our friends, for the people that we work with. We should not expect someone to apologize for being human, and we shouldn't have to apologize for being human ourselves, right? So we should be able to talk about mental health and experiences without shame, fear, or self-depreciation. And I think doing all of these things helps to make us relatable. It lets other people know that they're not alone. It can be very validating. I talked to someone just recently, not a teacher, but they work with a large group of students. And we were talking about a student that he was referring to me, and he said, I kind of feel like I know what she's going through. My mom was really depressed growing up. My mom was actually suicidal. I was raised by a single mom, so that really had a big impact on me. And I was like, oh, well, and I barely know this person. And I'm like, well, thank you for sharing that. That can't be easy to share. And I'm not saying that you have to share that with your students, but think about it, right? Maybe the way in which you phrase it, is important. We all need to have boundaries. It's not good to overshare, but I also think it's important to be relatable and to let students and friends and coworkers know that they're not alone. And, we've all kind of been through some shit, for lack of a better word, because that's really what it is. So I don't know if he, took my advice and talked to the student about some of his experiences or not. But just mentioning those things in conversation, it's not like you have to sit down and have a big heart to heart, but just mentioning those things in conversation can actually be effective in helping others to feel validated. Okay, so I mentioned responding. We've only got about 4 minutes left, huh?
Yes.
Our students will say things, and I think this is especially true in teaching, and especially true if you teach certain subjects, right? Because you bring those things to the surface. But you may have a student on campus, and you may work in the business office or STARS or CCR&R, and that student likes you and trusts you and relates to you, and so they're coming to you and talking about their personal life. The biggest thing you can do is just stay calm. Right? Don't overreact. I have students tell me things like, well, last week I cut myself 9 times. And if I were to say, oh my God, that's terrible, right? That might be what you're thinking because no one's ever told you that before. But if you were to say, oh my God, that's terrible, they might feel threatened or attacked, or they might feel like they can't share with you anymore because it was hard for them to tell you that in the first place. So just stay calm. Just listen to them. I'm going to stress this in the next session as well. I think it's really important to try not to judge, offer advice, or tell someone how to feel. You can refer students to me. That's what I'm here for. I know some of you are thinking, I don't even want to know these things, but sometimes we don't get a choice and students just tell us, right? Or maybe the people in line at Walmart tell us. So, those people you don't have to make a referral for, but students, obviously you want to give them information, refer them to me, refer them to RL Cares. I've got the link there for you Lifeline. And if you go to the rlc.edu webpage, you can go over to the right to the RL Cares side, or click on the RL Cares button, and you'll see the community resource booklet, U Lifeline, and those other things. I've just got one quick slide, and this is probably one of the more important ones, but I'm going to try to get through it in 2 minutes. But some of you probably wonder, well, what do I do with students, right? My goal, or my role on campus rather, is not to be a therapist, right? There's one of me, and how many students do we have? Close to 2,000. And so it would be virtually impossible, logistically impossible for me to be everyone's therapist. But a lot of times I do that referral. Somebody's not on on mute if you don't care to mute yourself. When I talk to students who are in crisis, maybe someone has brought that student to me, or maybe I've reached out to them. And this is especially true when I'm face to face with them, but I do this on the phone as well. A quick introduction, a discussion about classes. I go through basic non-threatening stuff. How are you feeling? What's going on? Right? I'm trying to build some rapport with students so that they feel comfortable and they trust me. I want to assess who they live with, because if they live alone, right, and they are engaging in self-harm, or they're depressed, or they've indicated that they could be suicidal, that's a big red flag. If they don't live alone, right, do the people in their household know what's going on? Do they have a support system, people they can talk to? How are they dealing with the stress of school and other issues? How much sleep are they getting? Are they eating? We may have then a discussion about eating habits and how they haven't eaten in 2 days, or how they're so stressed they're eating everything in sight. Are they on medication? How long have they been on it? I've talked to 2 people just recently who are on new meds, and they think that's making things worse. So those are all things to kind of keep in mind, or for me to keep in mind. I'm not asking you to talk to your students about these things, but these are some of the things that I do talk to students about. And do they have a doctor, psychiatrist, or mid management? Sometimes I just have to come out and ask them if they're suicidal. And if not, maybe have they been in the past? What's different now? Those kinds of things. And then we talk about where to go from here, right? Making referrals, whether that be a mental health referral or some other kind of referral. And before they leave, or before we get off the phone, I give them my contact information, make sure they have a link to U Lifeline. I give them the suicide prevention hotline, our community resource booklet. Depending on what issues are going on, sometimes a student emergency fund, right? So maybe they're stressed out because of financial struggles and those kinds of things. And things are just sort of like, spiraling down. So there's a lot of things that we cover, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea of that, so that you knew the things that I talk to students about. All right, we're out of time. If you want to stay in here for the next session, I think you're welcome to do so. Or if you want to bail, now might be a good time.
Sarah, I'm just gonna pause it for a minute, just so we have a break in here. Get your
Okay.
drink or whatever you need to do, lady. And let me know when you're ready to start.
Okay, thanks. It was even a little bit harder than the first one to condense to 30 minutes. So if it seems like I'm a little all over the place, it's because I really am. I'm trying to fit a couple different topics into 30 minutes. And I'm going to leave it here on the, I don't know, whatever you call this view, just so it doesn't freeze up on me like it did last time. Okay, so let me ask you guys, you may have seen that. What are some struggles that our students are facing on a daily basis? And if you were in the first session and you want to build on that, think about things that influence or impact social functioning. What are our students struggling with?
I think they struggle with money
Absolutely.
on the daily, or it seems that students, don't have the money to buy the required amount of tools, which I can say is not a whole lot. Bare bones, maybe $40-$50. Okay.
Right.
And to see that $40-$50, the kid doesn't have that, nor does the kid have $1 to go get a soda at the soda machine.
Right.
I think money's the biggest one with them. Is I get a lot of them.
Yeah.
I just don't have the money.
Yeah, absolutely. The chat, I've got a couple answers in here too. Transportation and food, that's huge. Even if they have a vehicle, gas is a big one right now. I've actually been trying to look into programs and resources outside of just the student emergency fund or Perkins for CTE students, because we've gotten so many referrals on I need gas money. And there's only so much we can do. Students struggle with transportation, being back in the classroom, right? If you've been virtual, it's weird now, and you're wearing a mask, and that can be, difficult. Social interaction, balancing school, work, and life. We all struggle with that, I think. But I think, when you're in that 17 to 20 age bracket, like we just talked about a few minutes ago, that can be particularly tough because you have so many things going on. And then the last one I'm seeing here in the chat is support from home, and that's huge, right? So maybe your parents didn't want you to go to college. Maybe they're upset with your choice of major. Maybe they wanted you to go work in the family business. So we have students sitting in our classroom, possibly with mental health issues like we just talked about, but then all of those other things too. Family dysfunction can mean a lot of things. It can mean your parents are getting divorced. It can mean there's violence in the home. It can mean that you are in a caregiving position for siblings that really is very stressful for you. Maybe somebody in your family has a lot of health issues and that's affected your finances, or you've had to step up and do some caregiving too. I've heard that from a lot of students recently, so I want to make sure to mention that. A traumatic experience, that could be some of those ACEs that we talked about in the last, and if you weren't here for the last one, I'll make sure those notes get put into Canvas, but it could be something that happened in your childhood, or it could be something that happened last week that was traumatic. Abuse, and that takes a lot of forms. If we're thinking about our students, it could be a domestic violence kind of situation, but it could be abuse in the home that they grew up in, maybe that they're still living in. Maybe they don't feel comfortable in their home. No transportation, gas, like Mikey talked about. I think we all know that's huge, and a lot of our students we've had this issue for a long time, but I think it's and if we look at that data that Mark talked about earlier, we know this is a bigger issue than it's ever been. And then other responsibilities, which can mean so many things. So these are the reasons that students miss class. They don't do the work. They have an attitude. I think sometimes we look at them and we think, oh, you're an F up, right? You're just a student who is just always making mistakes. We don't say those things maybe, but you think those things, right? We're all human and we stereotype sometimes and we make assumptions. And we really need to be cognizant of that, because that's not the right thing to do when we're interacting with people. And I think especially when we're interacting with students who are young, who are vulnerable, who are going through a lot of crap. I'm not asking you to lower your expectations. I'm asking you just to be realistic and compassionate, and to make that effort. And sometimes that's really hard, right? I've had those students before that it's like, oh my gosh, no matter what they do, or what I do, they're just not going to do the work, or they're not going to come to class or whatever. And sometimes that's the case, right? We can't save everybody. Look for reasons, not excuses, right? Students will make excuses get us nowhere, but if we look at the reasons that things are happening, I think that makes us more aware, more understanding, and then able to have conversations with them, connect with them, relate to them. So that approach we take is really important. Like I said, not everybody's going to succeed, but if we can treat people like people, right, then they may come back in the future, or they may decide, I am going to stick this out and I'm going to give it my best. Okay, so it is our job to help students discover and build on their strengths. So I'm switching from struggles to strengths here, and that's really hard to do because we don't always know what our students are struggling with. We don't always know what their strengths are. This isn't an easy task on a normal day, and when a student is facing a lot of struggles, it is really difficult to help them to discover and build on their strengths. So it's really important that we take a student-centered and strengths-based approach. But I want to ask you guys, what do you think that means? What does it mean to be student-centered? What does it mean to take a strengths-based approach? Anybody? Put it in the chat. Ah, good. We got something in the chat. Meet them where they are. Meet them where they are. Absolutely, right? So that doesn't mean physically, but that means like, mentally, maybe emotionally. Right. And we don't always know where they are. So sometimes we have to ask, like, hey, what's going on? Right. This is where it's really important to know your students, know yourself. Anybody else? One more in the chat. The focus on what they can do, not what they can't do. Ask and listen. Those are excellent answers. Mikey, did you start to say something?
Yeah. Like referring back to my dual credit kids, I try to find out what their interests, their hobbies are, maybe outside of why they're at Rend Lake, what are their part-time jobs. Just try to, find out, what they might be good at. A lot of times you can tell by the side jobs that they have, these kids, or whether it's kind of, where their strengths are in general.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important. Absolutely. If you can integrate that stuff into class, or you can, if you're in a situation where you play videos or you have activities and you can integrate some of those things into class, that's so important. I know with welding, that may not be the case. It was easy for me in sociology because we talk about everything in there. But even just your discussions with students, right, during the break or just whatever, like if you know those things about them, that helps to discover and build on their strengths. So that's really, really, really important. One more thing in the chat, ask them how they learn best and what resources do they use already. That, yeah, absolutely. So these are all things we know, but I think sometimes we forget, especially when we've got a big group of students, because it can be really overwhelming, right? We all have a million things that we're doing all the time. And so if we can take time out of our day, especially maybe at the beginning of the semester, to build some rapport and trust with our students and to ask them about their hobbies or to play some sort of an icebreaker, that goes a lot longer, or it goes a lot further than I think we realize sometimes. So being student-centered, oh, I have a typo there. I misspelled centered. Student-centered learning allows students to actively participate in their learning, whether that's telling you how they learn, right? Or you asking them what's going on, that's you meeting them where they're at. Learning is personalized. So what resources do they use? What kind of learner are they? Those answers that you guys gave, excellent. The campus is designed to be student friendly. I think we've taken, a lot of steps in the right direction when it comes to a student-centered campus, updates, logistics, those kinds of things, just making the campus more aesthetically pleasing. The wellness room, a lot of things that we're doing are really very student friendly. The coffee shop, all of those things are important. Allowing students to play a role in decision making. This is tough, right? And I'm not saying give the reins over to the students, because sometimes we can't do that. But if you allow them to be part of the conversation, if you let them talk about what's reasonable, right? That gives them some ownership, that helps to empower them. On the first day of class, when I went over the syllabus and I talked about expectations, I would always then say, what are your expectations of me? And students are like, I don't know. No one's ever asked that, right? And maybe some of you do that, but I had a lot of students that were like, I have no idea. No one's ever asked. So just those little things, I think, can help to really empower the student, and can help to bring out some of those strengths. And then taking the holistic approach, and that really goes back to remembering that our students are so much more than just students. They are that caregiver. They have a job outside of class. They have hobbies. When they're on campus, we see them as students, and we forget sometimes, just like they forget that we have lives outside of work, we forget that they're more than just students, I think. Okay, so yeah, I think we have a couple minutes where we can do this. How is your class or your program student-centered? How is our campus student-centered? Somebody give me some examples. And if you want to throw those in the chat, I'll just read them out. Anybody? Okay, if we don't know, it's good to have this discussion, right?
I think just being a resource for them, as that person that they can come to, that they're, that they recognize you as somebody they can ask the questions that they don't want to have. They can ask you anything, even though it's not your particular area, you can figure out a way for them. So I think just being that person for, even if it's 20 kids, my AmeriCorps members on campus, they know they can come to me about anything, Run Lake College. Yeah, and then absolutely. I can help them find an answer.
Good.
And I think our campus physically it's always been a challenge for it to be student-centered. But I see the library, in a real practical sense, the library revamp, I think, will help with that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right. To be able to get a coffee and then sit there with your friends in between classes, or if you're having a bad day and you want to go to the wellness room and just kind of chill for a little while, like both of those things keep students from going to their car and being isolated and then going home, or, not reaching out to somebody and saying, I've got a problem, who can I talk to? Or I've just got a question, who can I talk to? So, those things really do make our campus friendlier. lunch on the lake, the pumpkin painting contest, the rock hiding contest, and we've got some more coming up that Reese can tell us about, or you'll watch your emails for. But I think a photography contest, and I'm kind of forgetting what else. Those little things may seem like not a big deal to us, but they're huge to students. And I've heard so much positive feedback. I've seen students looking for rocks outside my window. I've seen students bring their own paints for the pumpkin painting contest because they're like so into it that they want their pumpkin to be the best. Okay, multiple outlets for a more personal experience, offering multiple means of learning. The campus is constantly looking for improvements to enhance student engagement. Smaller class size, yes. Nathan's comment, smaller class size, lunch on the lake. The student center is always busy now in the RL Cafe. I second the RL Cafe, affordable food. So all of those things are important. Now, do those things affect? Uh-huh.
Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Melissa. So I feel like the campus as a whole does great for, making the students feel welcome. The one thing that I get from my students is, since we're on the marketplace, they don't feel like they get the same kind of activities, like the rocks or the pumpkins. They were like, oh, that's something we want to do. So I feel like, can we bring some of those things to the marketplace? I know that there's not as many amenities at the marketplace, but I still would like for them to feel like they're a part of our team and a part of our Rend Lake College family.
And I'm glad you said that, because if you're not there, you just don't always think about those things. So I would like to say the answer is yes. I don't want to speak for other people, but I think absolutely. And I think just being aware is really important. So those are some discussions that, maybe we can have in student success about some of the student engagement activities that we're planning. And like, is there a day that we can go to the marketplace, one of us, and do some of those things with students? Because you're absolutely right. And I talk to Cosmo students on a pretty regular basis because of RO Cares. And I've heard the same thing before too, not so much about the student engagement stuff, but just it's really hard for them to get to campus to get resources sometimes. So, I've sent things over to them like through our mail system, but, feeling like you're part of something is really important. And so that kind of goes back to the whole discussion of mental health. When you feel engaged, when you feel like you're an important part of the puzzle, when you feel like you fit in, those things are going to help you to succeed, right? So if we're looking at student success, and that can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people: showing up for class, finishing classes, finishing your degree, making it through the day. For some people, that's success. This student-centered approach is going to play into all of that, because we want our students to feel included. So I'm really glad you said that. Vicki says, good points. RAI, respect, acceptance, and inclusion. 100%, absolutely. Right. And I think sometimes we forget those three really important things: respect, acceptance, and inclusion. And we don't have time to talk about all of those things right now, but absolutely. So here are just some of the examples that I thought of right offhand. I know we mentioned some of these: the coffee shop, the new furniture, the updates, clubs, Stars, AmeriCorps. Belonging to something like that really and truly can help you to have that person to go to, or to feel like, you've got a purpose, like you're on the right track. Things like FYE and Warrior Days help students to get information so they can make more informed decisions, and that can ultimately help with success. And maybe they're still feeling kind of lost, but they know who to go to, right? They know where to go if they have a question. So to go along with the strengths based, sorry guys. We want to identify and encourage strengths or assets. That really plays right into student centered. What are you good at? What do you like to do? We want to provide opportunities so that students can learn new things. Maybe they don't know what they're good at. Maybe they need those opportunities to do something they've never done before. It was really important for me when I was teaching to require activities and assignments that encourage, almost force students to reflect and to use critical thinking skills. That's going to look different in different environments, whether it's, this program or that club or whatever, class you're in. But to really think about that so that students are self-reflecting and so that they have an opportunity to say, oh, yeah, these are the things I like. These are the things I'm good at, so that you know that and you can build on those things. I think sometimes that's easier in programs because you're with those students for so long and you can develop those relationships. But I think that's really important in the classroom as well, when, you know, with the gen eds. Okay, we've got 11 minutes. I feel like I'm rushing through this. Is everything making sense? Okay, good deal. So how can we, so this goes back to kind of the same question as before, but there's a twist on it. So we're looking not just at student centered, but now we're really focusing on strengths. How can we help our students find their strengths? Think about your classroom, think about the campus, our programs, our services, logistics. How can we help our students find their strengths? And if you want to holler that out or put it in the chat, that works. Clubs from Kelsey and Lexi. Different groups that gather on campus. We need more of that stuff, right? Workshops, getting faculty to support, 100%. I agree with that. Anybody else? Okay, so this might be something to reflect on. Ask yourself how my, you know, whether you're in a position where you serve single students at a time that are, you know, paying bills or making schedules or something like that, or you're in a classroom, ask yourself, how am I helping these students find their strengths, right? What do I really know about them? How can I help them to build on what they're good at? Because that's just going to reinforce that success. That's going to help them to want to come back to class. Now, I'm making a shift here to resources because I think, and especially for me personally, it is so important to be a good resource person for students. Let me see what's in the chat before we do this. Structured or planned activities that bring together varying groups. Absolutely. And I think we're seeing some more of that. You know, I'd really love for us to think about campus life. You know, I know we're community college. Students don't, you know, necessarily come to campus to live like they do at a university, but we still do and can have campus life. Okay, so if we're looking at strengths, if we're considering struggles, right, we're looking at the student holistically. You know, you're a combination of your strengths and your struggles, right? There are things you're good at, things you're not so good at. There are things that are going right in your life, and there are things you're having problems with. So one of the big things for me, and this goes back more to mental health, but when I'm working with a student and they need a resource, and the reason I want to bring this up is because I think you guys can use this for yourselves, for friends and family members. I've talked to a lot of staff recently that are like, I need resources for myself. And so I just want to go through some of these things with you. Does everybody know how to find the community resource booklet? It's on our website. If you go to rlc.edu on the right-hand side, click RL Cares, you're going to see a few different things. One of those is the community resource booklet. You can email me anytime if you need it. I am always updating it, so I actually have a newer version than what's online. Excuse me, but I need to get that put online. Okay, here we go. One of the things I do with students or with anybody who says I need a therapist, or who is open to that idea. Oh my goodness, you guys. Talking too fast. Is go to Therapist Finder. If you Google find a therapist, there are a lot of different sites that will come up. This is one of the better ones, I think, but it is not all inclusive. It is not every single therapist in your area. Therapists actually have to go and register with the site and provide some information. So not everybody does that. Somebody give me their zip code.
62859.
Okay. Yeah.
Probably won't have much luck there.
It's going to show you stuff from Mount Vernon, probably.
Yeah, probably.
Right. So 62859 is McLeansboro. For those of you that don't know, if you're looking for a therapist there, you're going to have to drive. There's like one in the entire area, and I'm not sure that she's even listed on here. But it'll show you people who are close, right? So a lot of these people are Mount Vernon people. Some of them might be El Dorado with Egyptian Mental Health. That's what, about 20 miles from McLeansboro. So you can just put your zip code in. Somebody give me another zip code.
62959.
62959. All right, Marion. So you're going to get a lot more options probably. Sometimes you'll see it's the same people, right? Because they serve all of Southern Illinois. So you can narrow your search by issue, by insurance, by gender. Maybe you only want to see a female therapist. Maybe you want to see somebody who's a man, right? So it's your preference. Types of therapy. Age. This is the age of the client, not the age of the therapist. Price, right? I don't know how accurate that is. I usually don't use that. But I do sometimes use issues and insurance to make sure that I'm finding somebody who is a good fit for a student. So you can use that yourself. It's on the internet if you've never seen that. And there are some other really similar resources as well. Oh, okay. Sarah, can you share the screen you're using? Was I not doing that? Oh my gosh, I thought I was. Thank you. It says you're screen sharing. What do you guys see?
We just see your PowerPoint. I think you have to switch screens on your screen share.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. Okay, well, let's do this. Can you see it
Okay,
now?
yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we'll go back to the 62859. That's where we started. So you can just see here, right? When I put in a zip code, I get a list of people who are close, right? Mount Vernon, Harrisburg, and then issues, insurance, right? Like I mentioned before. So you can go through all of those things at the very bottom. There are options for teletherapy, which may be important right now. So you can click on that and see who provides that. There are also links to treatment centers. That's not nearly as updated as it should be in my experience, but you can get some results there as well. Psychiatrists for medication management, if that's what you're looking for, as opposed to actual counseling. So you can use that sort of thing. Okay, new share. Let's go back here. We don't really have the time, but I'll make sure that this gets put into Canvas so that you guys have these links. HSIDN is the Healthy Southern Illinois Delta Network. There's a lot of resources on there. Most of them are like Carbondale, Marion area. Pathcrisis.org is basically the same as calling 211, which is United Way. And you just say, here's where I live, here's what my need is. They have a database, they look things up for you, and they give you resources in your area. Is it comprehensive? Not as good as much as it should be. I've called before, and typically they don't tell me anything I don't already know. But then again, I work, with social service agencies pretty regular, so I'm familiar with them. So they might have some resources that you are unaware of. Use the community resource booklet. It's very comprehensive. I spent a lot of time updating it with health, mental health, financial, food pantries, you name it. If you see any discrepancies on there, please let me know, because like I said, it's a living document and I can change things as I need to. So this is my last slide. I wanted to go through all of these links, but I just don't think we have the time. So please, please, please do that on your own. You Lifeline, I mentioned that before. This is the college's free mental health resource. It is not terribly interactive. It's more informational. We had 492 students visit the ulifeline.org site in September. So we know, 492. Typically that number is somewhere around 100 to 150. But in September we had 492, and that might be because of something I had marketing send out to students. But nevertheless, we know that they need that resource. We know that they're struggling. We know that they're having mental health issues. We know that they need referrals. Okay. And then, this is what I reiterated earlier. This is kind of my last slide for the day for everything, I think. If a student comes to you and they need something, just listen. Don't give them advice or offer a solution unless you have information. You may talk to a student and they're like, oh my God, everything in the world is wrong and everything that could happen to me has happened to me and I'm depressed and life sucks, right? And then you say, oh, hey, let's talk to Sarah. Or, hey, can I refer you to oral cares? And they're like, absolutely not, right? That happens sometimes. So if you can say to them, well, okay, if you change your mind, right, here's the information, here's how to get a hold of oral cares, or I can have someone reach out to you. But in the meantime, right, here's our community resource booklet. Here's you Lifeline. The more you guys know, the more you can integrate that into discussions or just conversations with students. I think the better educated they can be on the resources that are out there to help them. And that's always a good thing, right? Okay, so we're out of time. If you have questions, please email them to me. And the next session, if you're interested, is really designed to help build some empathy. So
I have a question about COVID with the students, and as far as is the facility is Red Lake College, is there any plans to offer, I don't know, extended counseling, PTSD? I mean, we do teach nursing, and our students have been in the thick of this since the very beginning. And we're all kind of on high alert watching for any symptomology we might see, but I was just curious as to see maybe where we could send them if the case comes up.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Right now, send them to me for a referral, probably.
Okay.
Okay. Is there a plan? I'm not going to say yes or no because I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that question. I'm not sure I have the authority to answer that question. I would love to say yes, right? I'd love for, us to have 10 counselors on staff, but realistically, I know that's not necessarily the case. I have talked to the executive leadership team about the need for more mental health services. And so I think part of, and that just happened. Right. So there's not necessarily a plan at this point, but I do think that administration is receptive to offering more services. And one of the things might be, or one of the big things might be like a telehealth kind of service that we offer to students. So I've actually been researching those, and I've been on some calls with different companies to see what they offer and how those services are provided, and how much it costs per student and all those kinds of things. So I'm gathering some data there. And then once I get that information together, I'm going to propose that to the powers that be. But I'm not sure that I can really answer that question. So I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's fine. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing, like, I believe my role on campus is a lot of things, but personally, I see it as being an advocate for students and being a good resource person. So I think that should be true for all of us, right? So, keep asking those questions, because if the need is there, then, perhaps the response will be there too, if that makes sense, right? So we got to keep advocating for our students. So the goal of this session, we're ready to roll. Holly, are you recording?
Yes.
Okay. Not that I love being recorded, but that's part of it. So the goal of this session is not to diagnose students or think about what kind of treatment is best for them. That is not something that most of us in this session are trained to do. That's not something we should be doing. That's not our job. I know sometimes it probably feels like that's our job when our students, spill their guts and tell us their whole life story. But it's really just to increase empathy, right? So we're not trying to think about what's going on with them in terms of, maybe a mental health diagnosis. We also don't want to judge or dismiss them. I can't stress this enough. No one wants to hear, well, if I were you, here's what I do. Because guess what? You're not me. You don't know what I may have shared something with you, but you really don't know how I feel. And you don't know all of the struggles I'm going through. And you don't know all of the barriers that are keeping me from doing this thing that seems very logical to you, right? So that if I were you, oftentimes comes off as judgmental, and we all know that, and we still say it anyway, right? Because we're just trying to be helpful, and sometimes we're at a loss. So, just be cognizant of that. I know I've done that myself, and I really try not to, because I know people don't want to hear that, right? You're not me. I just want you to listen. Also, I think I've been really guilty of being that toxic positive person who's like, well, it'll be okay. Things will get better. Well, that's not always the case. And sometimes I think students feel like or people, right? People in your life. You think about this as it relates to anybody that you interact with. But I think sometimes that seems very dismissive, right? Like, well, your problems aren't that big. They'll get better. It'll be okay. And this kid's sitting here thinking it is not going to be okay. This is the worst thing I've ever been through. So, be as neutral as you can. Just provide that listening ear. The goal for this is to think about what it's like to live this person's everyday life and to consider their possible struggles. And we don't want to forget about their strengths. To be empathetic, understanding, and supportive and validating. Right. So you're not being a therapist, but you are being maybe a support person or a friend to somebody, or you're just listening. Right, which can go so much further than we realize. So this is George. I don't know if anybody's had George in class. Can you guys see him? Can you see my screen? Okay, good. All right. Last time I thought I was sharing and I wasn't. So holler at me if something seems off. George has anxiety, and he's been on meds since he was 12. He's 18 now. He's worked with a therapist. He has pretty good coping mechanisms. You don't know these things about George. He doesn't tell you, right? So he's sitting there. He's just, average everyday kid, but he's going through some things, or he's been through some things that have caused him to have anxiety. And so, you notice that sometimes he seems uncomfortable in class. You wonder what's going on with him. There was a day where he left early and he didn't come back. And then he came back at the very end when everybody was gone, grabbed his backpack. You were still there. You're like, hey, are you okay? And he just said, yeah, and walked out the door. Right now, that's not a lot of info. And in the classroom, or when you're, maybe talking to somebody about financial aid, or you're registering them for classes, you're not even going to know that much stuff. But let's pretend we're George for a minute and put ourselves in George's shoes. What do you think his everyday life is like? What are some of his struggles? Can I get a volunteer?
Just being able to interact, really.
Yeah.
I mean, that sometimes if somebody's struggling with anxiety, that's about all you can pull off, is to and if in his situation, if he's then reached that point where he's at his limit as to what he can deal with, then probably getting up and leaving is the best thing he could do at that point.
Yeah. And you might be thinking, like, what did I say, or what was going on? Maybe you did say something, maybe you didn't. Maybe he's just having a high anxiety day. So, just kind of being aware of that, the fact that maybe that's what's going on. And if there's ever an appropriate time for him, to talk to you about that sort of thing, allowing him that space. But, a lot of times we aren't even going to know these things. Okay, this is Taylor. Taylor comes through. She has really cool sunglasses. I like those. She comes to register for classes. She's undecided on her major, but she says, I think I want to work with kids. Maybe I want to be a psychologist. So you ask her, well, have you worked with kids before? Why do you think you want to work with kids? And she says she wants to be there for kids that don't have good families. Right. So now she's crying. Like, this has really sort of brought some stuff up for her. She's crying in your office. How many of you have had that happen before? Probably quite a few of us. And you ask her if she's okay, and she says she's fine. She seems really embarrassed. It takes a minute for her to stop crying. And then she's like, I'm okay. I just want to make my schedule and get to work. Right. Then we fast forward to the next semester, and Taylor's taking psych, social work, math, English, and FYE. She's loving her classes, but some of the topics are really tough for her. Some of the content is triggering, that I just made that word up, is triggering, and she doesn't know how to handle it. Right now, we think of being triggered as being offended. Those two things are not the same, right? And I just want to point that out, because I think we sometimes use those terms interchangeably. But being triggered means that, something has been said or something has happened that's bringing up these old feelings, these traumatic experiences perhaps she's been through in the past. So she's sitting in class and she's feeling super triggered, right? But she loves her classes and she wants to learn. She's just having a hard time. So put yourself in her shoes for a minute and just kind of think about the things she's going through on a regular basis. Yeah, the chat says something about George might feel like he doesn't fill in. Taylor might feel the same way, right? Are the other people in this class going through the same thing? Have they had these shitty childhoods too, right? I can't tell people what's happened to me. Nobody would relate. You know, and we all probably have that student that's sitting in class feeling that way on a regular basis, and we don't even know it. Comments about Taylor?
I think that's something that will probably likely happen to many students who are wanting to go into maybe social work or therapy, like majors, just because, you know, they go into that because of what they've experienced in their lifetime, and they want to make sure that they have an avenue that helps people that they didn't have before. And I think we just have to, you know, approach that with some grace and just, you know, some understanding a little more. And like you said, empathy. That, you know, these students are going into this because they want to help people, but they probably are doing that because they've experienced trauma that was not handled correctly for them. And
it's, oh, go ahead.
I just think it's a very sensitive subject that we have to be aware of, and especially in those classrooms, or, you know, in mine and Lexi's position, when students come in and talk to us, we have to keep that in mind. And we have to understand that students are coming in and they're needing help. And, you know, we don't know every factor of why they need help. And
right.
I think in just like a staff position, that's something we have to keep in mind, because it's really easy to just say, you didn't follow the protocol, so we can't do anything for you. So that's difficult, especially when there are policies and procedures in place.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a good point, because there may be 15 different things that are going on inside a student's head, and there may be 5 different struggles. Maybe they were afraid they were going to run out of gas on the way to campus, and you know they're afraid that they're not going to be able to make it home, and then they go to class, and you know today's subject is domestic violence, and that's like really hits home for them, and then they realize they've got to, you know, run and fill out the scholarship stuff, and they've got to get to work. So it's like our students are really juggling a lot. And when maybe their mental health is being impacted, that just makes it that much harder. And I think you're right, you know, as far as giving them, again, not changing the rules, but maybe giving a little bit of grace, or just having a conversation like, hey, we really need to talk about, like, you keep missing these deadlines, and if you're going to do that, here's what's going to happen. So, you know, what's going on, and do you need some resources, or do you know, is there, maybe you need to talk to somebody. And of course, in that sense, you're probably going to send them over to me, and hopefully I'm available, but you could make that general oral cares referral as well. And so, you know, if I'm not there, or if I'm busy, that allows me the opportunity to get with the student later. Dwayne, this is Dwayne. I tried to find a picture of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, actually, when he was younger, because I knew Holly would like that. But no, that's not why. I stole these images from Google. I wanted to have the faces that were relatable. And when I was putting together this presentation last week, I watched on YouTube a documentary about comedians and actors with depression, and it was really good. It's one of the better ones I've seen. So I can drop the link in Canvas, or have Sherry do that. But one of the people who spoke was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and he talked about being depressed, you know, and that's not something I knew about him, because I don't really follow him. So this is inspired by him, but it's the details are made up. So Dwayne's a class clown, right? He's a likable guy, but he's one of those that you have to tell to be quiet on a regular basis. He's kind of all over the place. Usually he completes his work. Right now he has a C average in class. He's also a basketball player. At practice and on the court, he's super focused, right? So what do you think that means? He's this way in the classroom. He's totally different on the court. Anybody? See the chat.
Probably
just-
when he when he feels good about something, when he feels that he's really good at something like basketball, he's different. When he's in class, he doesn't feel as good. So that's that class clown.
Yeah, basketball is his outlet. Absolutely. The court is his comfort zone. And maybe he's just never been the best student. And you think about reinforcement, right? When you're on the court, people are cheering, people are excited, right? You see that accomplishment. I'm not athletic, but I think we can all relate to getting positive feedback from others. I don't address this here, but maybe he's got some ADHD stuff. And so it's really hard for him to be settled in the classroom, but on the court, not only is that his outlet when it comes to his hobby or his ambition, but also it might be his outlet when it comes to just getting his energy out, right? We don't teach little kids. And some of you may be from the children's center on here, but little kids have to get their energy out, right? That's true for adults and teenagers too. Maybe not to the same extent, but we all need that, right? So those endorphins and that pent up energy sometimes that makes all the difference. So maybe that's what's going on with Dwayne.
I feel like Dwayne is like myself. Like basketball practice or practice for any sport, like has a structure to it. You know what I mean? So, maybe at home or, maybe he just follows that structure, in a way that fits him better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and another thing that might be going on with him is that in our society, generally, we're taught to cover things up and get over it. And I think men especially come under that pressure.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then, the next paragraph, which you guys have probably already read, but Dwayne seems to be happy, but really he's depressed. He just doesn't realize it. And I think that can be true for a lot of people. Maybe he wouldn't consider himself depressed, but if he were to kind of, go to a therapist or a doctor, they'd say, yeah, you've got some depression issues. And he's used humor to deflect for years. So that, that's the class clown stuff. He really doesn't know he's depressed, but he'll say things like, well, a lot of terrible shit happened to me growing up, but I'm fine. How many of you have heard a student say that? Maybe you've said that, right? And so is he really fine? Well, probably not, but he's coping, and basketball is helping with that, right? And that's sometimes, I think, when you're the coach, you may realize that, but when you're the teacher, that's a lot harder to realize. Carrie says humor helps him cope with anxiety and fear. Jeff says we had an individual like this. They were uncomfortable when they were in a situation that was not familiar and they didn't measure up, right? So comfort zone is really important. And I think we've done a good job of putting ourselves in Dwayne's shoes. He must be pretty relatable, like Tommy said, he can relate to him. And I think probably we've all had students or friends that are kind of like Dwayne. So let's go ahead and move on to Misty, whose mom died 4 months ago. I have talked to more students, and I know my role on campus is different than it was when I was teaching, but I have talked to quite a few students in the last year or two who've lost a parent or who've lost a family member. Maybe it was COVID related, maybe not. That creates its own set of challenges too. I'm not sure what happened to Misty's mom, but she died 4 months ago. And since then, Misty has really struggled to stay in school and to also make it to work. And she's feeling pretty sad and hopeless, right? And we know that's part of the grief process. Anger, bargaining, depression. Misty's not at acceptance yet. And even when she gets there, she's still going to have some of these feelings because she's grieving. She's an only child. She's never been close to her dad. She has one good friend and a boyfriend, but their relationship isn't great. And she feels like she doesn't have anybody to talk to. Just recently, she tested positive for COVID and she was quarantined for 10 days. So she missed work. She's stressing about bills. And now she's returned to school, but she's feeling very overwhelmed. How many of you have this student or this person? You may not know the grief stuff, but you were like, okay, they're coming back to school and they tell you, I'm overwhelmed. I can't do this. I've got to pick up hours at work. I missed 2 weeks of work. I can't pay my bills. Right. So tell me a little bit about Misty. Put yourself in her shoes for a minute. Anybody?
Sir, we had a girl that was pretty close to this situation currently.
Yeah, I mean, and I've talked to quite a few students that honestly, like, this is like this situation they're in. And you might know some of these things about them, but you're not going to know everything. This is the person who's sitting here and they seem withdrawn. They seem uninterested in class. They might even seem pissed off, because we know sometimes depression almost comes out as anger. They might just be hating life right now, and for good reasons. Maybe you know these things, maybe you don't. How do you relate to this person? Is it important to do that, right? You know, we know we can't save everybody, but we want to be able to be there for our students so that they can share these things with us. We can make those appropriate referrals, or you guys can call me or RL Cares. So, yeah. You may have Dwayne and Misty and Taylor and George all in the same class, right?
I sometimes feel like I have a little bit of a hard time with situation with students dealing with really tough at home, because, right, if you can't take care of your basic needs, you can't focus on schoolwork. But then sometimes I also feel like that engaging in that work can be therapeutic, might be a little bit far, but you know what I mean? Sometimes if I try to encourage them, maybe if you can get focused and engaged for that period of time, that will be some type of therapy for you. So I feel like it's a hard, knowing how hard to push is hard to know.
And that's true. And that's when it comes back to like the strength-based stuff and knowing your students, because for some students, they're just not capable, right? If that's where they're at emotionally, like they're not capable. And for other students, it's like, yes, give me work, keep me busy, because that's their coping mechanism. Going to the chat, life issues are so consuming. She can't focus on school. Nathan said, I had two students this week that lost a parent, and I have no idea what else they're going through. Right. So they've lost a parent, but maybe they also are having financial issues, or, COVID stuff, or maybe they already had depression and anxiety issue. I mean, there's just so many outlet or facets to who we are. And I think it's just good to be aware that these things happen. So this is Jackson. Jackson is transgender. He has experienced anxiety and depression. You don't know this about him. He's generally quiet and withdrawn in class. And he's just kind of feeling fed up about, feeling left out, some of the pain he's going through, depression. But he feels like he can't tell anybody. In high school, Jackson was called JC, his birth name, and nobody ever corrected, and he never corrected anyone because he didn't want to be, odd man out, made fun of. He really didn't want the attention, but now Jackson is in college and he just wants to be accepted. His legal name is still JC. He sent an email to his teachers saying, please call me Jackson. A couple responded and said, sure, we'll do. And a couple have never responded. And now Jackson's sitting in your classroom. So how's he feeling? What's he thinking?
I can't even imagine. I mean, he's not even had his basic identity needs met. So how can you possibly focus on something else?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I completely agree with Nathan. I mean, it's our job to make sure students feel accepted and that we are, understanding their needs, and starting just with their individualization is bottom line. If we can't do that and make them feel safe or, respect their wishes, then how are they going to be successful? And how are they going to move on and be more successful after in life?
Right. And personal opinions aside, what do you care what somebody wants to be called? Right. What difference is it to you? Right. We've got to meet the student where they're at. We've got to think about them from that holistic perspective. Everything Kelsey and Nathan just said, 100%. And so, that one little thing can make all the difference for a student when it comes to, feeling included, participating in class. If I look at the chat, he's probably feeling like an outsider. He's probably constantly anxious about interaction in the classroom and maybe being judged. So 100%, absolutely. Nathan?
I mean, you saying yes to that email or message or whatever, it might seem like a minor thing, even if it's against what you personally believe. It might be the first time that that person's ever heard that, and literally is the beginning of them becoming themselves.
Yeah.
So what might seem like nothing to someone else is truly everything to that student at that point.
Yeah.
And I think it boils down to respect. Why would you not do that for a student?
Right.
If you respect that student and that student's wishes.
Yeah.
One thing that the college has done that I really like on our class list, you can put in what they want to be called. I had this happen with a Zoom class last semester, and same kind of situation. The name was Hannah, but they went by Marcus, and because they could put that in there, I knew, and I could call that student by Marcus, and it made all the difference. The student put their video on, they interacted. So that's one thing I think the college that I like that we have done to help with that.
Yeah. And little things do make a big difference. Like you'll see, I have my pronouns there, and I know 2 or 3 of you do as well. That just kind of normalizes, gender identification, and it makes it easier for students to say like, oh, you're she, her, I'm he, him, or whatever. So that can open that conversation, or that can make them feel like, oh, okay, well, this is something you're aware of. Like I can talk to you about these kinds of things. So I'm not saying everybody needs to change their profile name, but if that's something that's important to you and you want to be approachable to students, it's something you probably would want to consider. Oh, we've got 6 things in the chat. I cannot imagine what teachers have to deal with. Yeah, we're expected to provide an education, but also tend to individual issues as well. That's true. Obviously I can tell you with experience, and it can be really, really tough. And we're not really teaching subjects, we're teaching people, and people have needs, and that makes our job a lot harder sometimes, because we have to focus on things that, we never thought we'd have to focus on. Okay, I've got one more, and we've got 1 minute, so we probably can't really talk much about Jeff, but he misses a lot of class. He's a returning student. He's a non-trad at this point. He's been here for years, off and on. You like Jeff, he's really bright, but he just disappears sometimes. And maybe you've had this student in class, or maybe you're like, oh, he's, filing out this financial aid appeal because he's back again. Or, maybe he's been in and out of advisement 15 times because he has a hard time with retention and completion. So he's either really on it or totally disconnected. You suspect that he might be using drugs or alcohol, but you don't know. Could be a mental health issue, could be both, right? We don't always know. But you have him in class, and at one point in the semester, he says he's been to rehab before, and he is struggling every day not to drink. So just kind of put yourself in Jeff's shoes if you want to. And then we've got about 30 seconds for takeaways. Anybody? Unless you want to spend your lunch hour together. Thanks, Gabby.
Just thank you, Sarah. Thank you for all that you do, seriously.
Yes, thank you.
Well, you guys are welcome. And thank you too, because we're all doing it. Every one of us. And I think that's why it's important to have these sessions. I'm just making words up. These sessions to talk about these issues, because sometimes we forget, right? And I was really bad about being like, oh, I'm behind, right? I wanted to have this test, today, and we're not anywhere close to where we need to be because we've talked about all these other things. And so it's hard to stay on track and to also be accessible to students and to deal with the things that they're going through and to meet their needs. So thank you guys. Thank us. All of us are doing these things in different aspects. So, but I appreciate you guys. Okay. All right. Well, if you have questions that you didn't want to ask, or things that you want to ask later, just send me an email. If you have students that you need to refer to RL Cares, you can reach out to me, but I really would prefer that you email rl-cares@rlc.edu, or call the 1225 extension just in case I'm not there, I'm busy. We don't want that student to be left hanging. So, we want to be able to get to them as soon as possible. Anyway, have a great lunch. I'll see you guys later.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.